Yeah, but thanks so much for all those kind words. I must confess that, for someone who tries to write about other people and and share stories, nothing could be more interesting than to be able to hear the story of a person like Mr. Kumravale himself. And I think it was an absolute pleasure for me to have met him, to have heard his story, and then had a chance to perhaps share that story with the world at large. And like Kumravale, there were a few other people that I had met, and what you see here are some glimpses of the people who I actually met. So what I thought I'll do is maybe spend the next 20, 30 minutes giving you a quick feel for what I went through as I wrote this book, what I learned, and maybe give you a quick trailer of what's inside the book, and then maybe take questions from all of you. And I'd be more than happy to try and answer questions as we go along. So really, it all started about a year and a half ago when the Times of India folks approached me and asked me if I'd write a book about entrepreneurs. So, they have a business called Brand Capital, which invests in small businesses. And the intent was they had completed 10 years and they wanted to celebrate this whole idea of entrepreneurship. And they wanted someone who would come and try and say something which could encourage young people to go out and become entrepreneurs. I must tell you that I think in their mind what they really wanted was a textbook which will go into business school and become, a textbook on how to be an entrepreneur. And I said, it's a great idea, but I can't do it. But what I can do is perhaps to try and share stories of the people who might have done something and what can we all learn from those people. And that's how the book was born, Yoo Too Can. And really, it's a collection of stories. And if you've read anything that I've written earlier, even if you haven't, as you'll figure in the next half an hour, I love stories. I love to tell stories. And I think stories are powerful. Somebody will tell you that you must not give up, you must continue to persevere. And you'll say, yeah, I've heard this before. But if someone can tell you a story about someone who persevered and someone who never gave up, maybe that story will stick in your head. Okay? There are times when people will tell us that what we're doing is wrong, and we resist it. We don't want to hear someone say that we are wrong. But if someone tells you a story where that person might have got it wrong, and that relates in some way to what you might have done, you will suddenly realize that maybe what I'm doing is wrong and I need to do it differently. And I think that, to me, is really the power of storytelling. And what I've tried to do over here is really to try and tell lots and lots of stories. I do believe that success leaves tracks. So if you want to know how to do it, if you want to learn what you can do differently, very often it's pretty simple. Just follow in the footsteps of other people. Okay? If you want to be an entrepreneur, maybe there's an idea here that you just try and say, hey, what have other people done? Okay? And you don't have to be the first one getting there. You can learn from people who've been there before. Okay? And I must tell you that as I finished the book, I also figured that it's not only success which leaves tracks. What else leaves tracks? Failure. So failure leaves tracks too. And I think we can all learn a lot about what we need to do, about life, about business, from people who might have been there before. So for me, this book was really like, imagine that you're on a flight and sitting next to you is this entrepreneur. And it's a long 3.5 hour flight and you have some time with that person. And now you can keep asking them all the questions you always wanted to ask. And that person doesn't have a choice but to answer. Okay? And for me, this is really what it was. So I kept asking. I was this little kid in completely fascinated. Wow, look at what these people have done. And I was just asking questions and I was listening to their stories. Here's the interesting bit. So what you'll find in this book are 20 people who are featured in this book. But I actually met maybe more like 30 people. Okay? And you don't find all the stories in this book. And there's a good reason for that. Because many people don't really want to kind of open up and tell you what they went through. Okay? So very often people will tell you, how do you get it right? We have smart, big idea, strategy, capital, people, good brand. Come on, that's not what I was interested in. I was looking for the story. Tell me what happened, and then what happened, and then what did you go through, and what was on your mind, and tell me about the time when, so when people told me about what happened, that one morning I came to the office and this is what happened, or that day, the children had to go to school and there was no money to pay the fees, and I said, hey, what will I do? So when people start telling you those stories, you start saying, wow, this is getting interesting. And maybe there are lessons that we can all learn from what they might have done. So what you have in this book are some business lessons, but more importantly, you have lots of life lessons. Okay? And what I thought I'll do is to quickly share with you a set of stories, maybe 5, 6, 7 of those, to give you a glimpse into what really happens inside the mind of an entrepreneur. And that's something we just talked about, Dr. Velumani. Okay, how many of you heard of Dr. Velumani? Lots of people. And now he speaks a lot in this part of the country, from what I know. So you probably heard him speak too. Last week he was here. Okay, then this week is only first day of the week. He'll come again. You know, he should be here. He's very fond of it. He's got a great story to tell. Okay, and for me, I don't know if you know this, but Dr. Velumani, small town kid from a little village, Appanaikanpatti, close to Coimbatore somewhere. Okay, there he is, and he comes into Bombay, okay, for a job, has an interview with the Baba Atomic Research Center, and has something like less than 500 rupees in his pocket. Not sure how long it'll take before he gets a job. So instead of spending money on a hotel, he actually sleeps on the platform of VT station. Okay? Now, as they say, fast forward, small bit of detail. His company, Thyrocare, just went public earlier this year, currently valued at I think about 4,000 crores. No, he doesn't own all of it. He only owns about 70%. Yeah, you know, just imagine. For a man, and I think this is what is interesting for me. These are not people from another part of the world. These are not people from another generation or, 300 years ago what happened. These are people who are around us today. And in one lifetime, somebody spent a night sleeping on a station platform in Mumbai and today is worth over 3,000 crores. Okay? I think it's fascinating. And it's people like him who then have lots and lots of stories to tell about what they did, the mistakes they made, what did they learn, how did they get it right. And I love it. He's got this almost, when he speaks to you, you feel like this, that old uncle in a village who's now done very well. He said, right, you must hear this. That's the way he goes. But it's fascinating listening to him. And I love this little story he says about, when you finally ask him, what's really the secret? What does it take to succeed? And he makes it very simple. He says, you know what? It's very simple. You need to learn how to look at your life differently. And what does he do? Thyrocare is a business that does testing of your blood. Okay? That's really what they do. And they do it at a price which is less than 50% of what the whole world seems to be doing it at. Okay? And I asked him, how do you get the idea? What does he do? So it's very simple. He says, I found that people who have these labs, they have this expensive machinery sitting in a lab. Okay? And that machinery is waiting for the sample to arrive. Okay? And then once the sample comes, the machine starts running and it tests the blood. And I said, why can't we do it differently? Why should the machine wait for the sample? Why can't the sample wait for the machine? Okay, so what he's done is, he's created this one big factory in Mumbai, outside Mumbai, Navi Mumbai really. And if you're in Asansol or whether you are in Karur, you can go get your blood tested. That blood sample will then catch a plane and fly to Mumbai and then reach the laboratory by midnight. And before 8 a.m., it would have got processed and the results would have been sent back to the lab. That's how he does it. It's much cheaper. Ask him, how do you get this idea? He says, very simple. I saw the Times of India. When I came to Mumbai, I didn't know English. I had to read English. I had to read the newspaper. And as I started reading the Times of India, I then learned that the Times of India does not print a copy of the newspaper every time something happens. They let the news happen every day, throughout the day. And at the end of the day, all the news comes to Mumbai and the newspaper gets printed. And I said, why can't I do that? Okay. I think this is another trick that entrepreneurs seem to have, this ability to connect the dots. Okay. To see something which is completely different and then try and say, hey, how can I apply this in my own business? And that's how Thyrocare has become as successful as it has. And of course, he says, very simple stuff. He says, success is very simple. All you need to do is 4 things. Focus, learn, grow, enjoy. Okay. Now, if anybody said this, you would have said this is nice, good words. But when Dr. Velumani says it, he says it with a twist. He says, you know what the problem for young people is? They don't follow the sequence. Okay. They want to enjoy first. Okay. Many people will make mistakes, enjoy, and then learn. He says dangerous. So focus, learn, grow, enjoy. And he says most important, remember the sequence. Okay, so fascinating guy. And here's another man I met, Ashok Jain, not heard of in this part of the country. He runs a diabetes clinic called Lifespan. Okay, he's a diabetic, okay? Big time diabetic, and he says it's the one that's killing more people. It affects more people in this country, and he says it's not being managed well. My mission is to help India manage diabetes. He says it's one of those things that you can't cure, but you can learn to manage, and that's really what he tries to do. And what also strikes me about him is that we often think these entrepreneurs are people who either slept on the railway station or whose grandfather was a big businessman, right? He was a regular corporate employee. He used to work for Cadbury's. He used to sell chocolates. He used to sell ice cream. He used to sell soft drinks. He was that kind of guy who then went on to become an entrepreneur. Okay? And he gives me great advice. And if any of you here want to be successful, he says, my mantra is simple. Find a mentor. Find somebody who will kind of be the guy who then takes care of you, who looks after everything that happens to you in your life. Okay? And he has a mentor. His mentor is a man called C.Y. Pal. When he joined Cadbury's as a management trainee, C.Y. Pal was the chairman. Okay? And then when he set up this company 25 years later, C.Y. Pal was the angel investor. He's somebody who's kind of influenced him throughout his life. So of course I asked him the obvious question. It's nice to say you must have a mentor, but how do you find one? How does anybody find a mentor? Okay? And I think Ashok's advice was terrific. He says the mistake most people make is that when you're looking for a mentor, you tend to look for someone who can help you. So don't do that. Look for someone you can help. Okay? Find somebody who is big there, who's trying to do something very different, who's trying to change the world, and you go and tell him, I will help you. You tell me what you want me to do, I will do it for you. And he says, when you become that kind of person who does anything for someone, that's when that person will become a mentor for you. So very often when we look at this picture, we tend to think that the mentor is the guy at the top helping the other person to come up. Not true. Very often, okay, the mentor is the guy who's saying, hey, I want to get an army of people with me who will help me, who will do what I want to do. Okay, and that's how you'll probably end up finding a mentor. Okay, how many of you shop with Big Basket? Okay, okay. Interesting business. Again, somebody who's an MBA from a fairly premier business school who goes on to set up a business, Big Basket. And Big Basket for me was interesting because there are a bunch of 6 people who run Big Basket. Okay, and this is their second business together. Okay, so they've earlier run what was called Fab Mall. Okay, India Plaza, Fab Mall, sold it to Trinetra, Aditya Birla. And the same group of people has come back to run this business. I often wonder, why is it that 2 brothers sometimes can't get along and run a business together? And here you have 6 people who are friends who kind of come back together for a second time to run that business. Okay? And I think it's interesting. He said, you know what? The most important thing you need really is to share values. Okay? Is to be able to have values. No, don't worry about it. Is to have values which are common. And once you have common values amongst the founders, that's when they will stick together. So he says, none of us wants to fly business class. Okay? We think it's a waste of money. None of us wants to be on the cover of the news magazine to say he's the CEO. He says we all fought to not be the CEO of the company. Okay? Each of them wanted the other person to be the CEO. Okay? And he says that when you have common values, then you don't have disputes. When you have a disagreement, you can have disagreements, but if your values are consistent, you will never have a fight. And maybe that's a good lesson for a lot of us, where when we try and do business together, make sure the values are right. And what's bringing you together is not just the lure of saying we can make money, but the fact that we have common values which will hold us together. He gave me another interesting story. If you buy something from Big Basket, you know, they put everything into this plastic box. And then to lock the box to make sure there's no pilferage, they put one of those little plastic tags on it, a bit like what happens in an airport, in some airports where if you've got hand baggage, they'll put that painful little thing, after which when you get to the hotel you can't open. You need to really kind of, try all of it, doesn't work, and then you get a scissor and then you try and crack it open. So he has one of those plastic things that locks up the box. And then what do? They make sure that every delivery boy has a scissor in his pocket, so that when he goes to the store, to the home, he can cut it open. That's not all. The delivery boy has instructions that once you cut it, you've got to pick it up from the floor and take it away. Because if you leave it on the floor, very often in Indian homes, people walk barefoot, and the lady of the house might actually end up stamping it and getting hurt, or just feeling a little bit of a pinch on her heel. He says, we don't want that to happen. So they have an instruction that you must actually cut it, pick it up from the floor, and take it away. Okay? And I was fascinated. That's the attention to detail that great businesses are all about. And I think every business has its equivalent of that plastic tag. An opportunity to make a difference to customers, an opportunity to tell customers that we care for you. Okay? It may be a small thing, but we care. And I think that's really what big businesses are all about, paying attention to small details. I love this guy, Abhishek Lodha. Not very known, well known here, but big builder. How many of you have heard of him? Yeah, quite a few of you. Big builder. Okay? And Lodha Builders in Bombay is like, really the big guy out there. And like all of us, not too much respect for builder. You don't think it's really the most, not necessarily the most respectable profession in a sense that you might think. But this guy studied at Georgia Tech, worked for McKinsey, smart chap, here to create a business. And he talks about making Lodha Builders like a Tata's. He says, I want to compete, not to just be the best builder, but to be a company that's respected amongst other corporates. Something interesting happened when I went to meet him. Okay, so I go there to his office, I have a 12 o'clock meeting, and as I reach there 11:55, and I tell my driver, I'll see you in about a couple of hours, maybe 3, so you can go and park and have lunch. And as I get down from the car, a man walks up to me wearing what looks like a bit of a uniform, dark blue trouser, light blue shirt, and he comes right up to me and he says, Mr. Iyer, welcome. Now, as a small-time author, you'd like to believe you're famous, but this is not true. So you wonder, wow, not bad, this guy actually recognized you, so you go up with him, and he fast-tracks you. So, in that building there's security, you have to first show your Aadhaar card, PAN card, take a picture, smile, and then sign, and then give your telephone number, and after all that, they'll give you a slip of paper, and now go to security. I didn't have to do any of those things. This guy just took me away, took me into the lift, up to the 17th floor, where I meet Mr. Lodha. And Abhishek comes in and starts talking to me. And we have a good time, and then he talks about how people in his organization go the extra mile. Okay? He's created a team of people where they want to do more, where they want to say, how can we tell people that we care for you? And I tell him about my experience at the end, and I say, you know what, I was very surprised that somebody came in like this, and I said, how do you do it? And he said, pretty simple. We have a rule that every visitor to the office must be made to feel special. And that man has access to my calendar, so he has seen that at 12 o'clock, the visitor is Prakash Iyer. And he says, now here's the bit that he might have done extra, which is he's gone and Googled you and found out what you look like, so that he can welcome you as you get in. Okay? And I said, wow. Then I asked Abhishek, what do you do to make this happen? Because this doesn't happen everywhere, right? It does. Why is it that in some organizations, people are willing to do this extra bit? Whereas in many other larger companies, people are saying, you know what, it's 5 o'clock, I need to go. Okay, I couldn't care, I've done my bit for the day, right? And he gave me an interesting story. He said, it's pretty simple. If you respect people for what they are and who they are, they tend to respond by doing a little bit more for you. And he gave me an example, and he said, if you imagine now that you're the MD of the company and you've got this piece of paper that needs to be photocopied, and you quickly turn around and say, Abdul, you want this to be photocopied. And when you say Abdul's actually having lunch. Okay? And he asked me, he says, what would you do then? Do you expect that Abdul will leave his lunch and come running up to you and say, ha sir, what can I do for you? And take it and photocopy it? Or do you tell Abdul, doesn't matter Abdul, finish your lunch, this can wait? What do you do? And he says the difference between what you do actually determines whether your people will go the extra mile and do this for you, or they'll be the kind of people who will just sit back and say, you know what, I'll do what I'm supposed to do and no more. Okay? And I think these are lessons you don't necessarily expect. Only, you think corporates think they know it all. Corporates think they'll spend large sums of money on culture. How do I create great organizations? And I think you have in people, people who built businesses, who may not have been to these fancy schools, but who now get it right and say that's the way to build a great organization. Okay, and of course that's really what the lesson I learned from you. And of course, my hero here. Let's have a round of applause for our own local, Mr. Kumraville. Okay, what a man, what a story. Okay, and I must tell you this, that he said this bit about learning, being a learner, and I think that's a great trait of successful entrepreneurs. They are constantly learning. They never come at something as if I know it all. He will never say, I know the answer. He's saying, really? Tell me, how do you do it? I remember one entrepreneur who, I was recording the conversation on my iPad, because my phone might ring or somebody else might want to reach me, so I keep my phone aside and I use my iPad to record. And this entrepreneur spent the first 20 minutes asking me, how do you do it? How does it work? What's the app? Oh, very good. Even I must try and use it. So I think it's a very natural trait for entrepreneurs. They're hungry for information, hungry for knowledge. Okay, and you should know about Kumraville's story, because this is a story which is, as they say, made in Chennai, and they don't make it better than what Kumraville has done. Here's a man who's struggled in the early part of his life. Okay, struggled, did lots of businesses, tried, failed, came to success, had these dreams. He has two brothers, both of whom had seen success in their businesses. He's tried and done some work with them, did a bit, didn't like it, got out. Then, of course, thought he's hit this jackpot. He had a dream, and he had to hit 5 crore, if I remember the number was right. He had this dream, I must be 5 crore. Why? Because my brother has done 5 crores. And then he hits it, creates a product which is doing extremely well. It's actually a shikakai, powder for your hair. And then, of course, he says it's messy. People have to make a paste out of it, make water. So he comes up with new technology. In laminated tubes, you can put that thing in and it'll work. And he thinks, wow, success is beckoning. He should go all India. Life is good. Suddenly what happens? He gets a call from a distributor in the morning at 11 o'clock. He's used to it. Lots of people call him by, sir, sarakille sir, anpungo sir, sales irukku sir, demand rumba sir. All that happens. He gets a call and the guy says, problem sir, that shikakai has become black. He says, oh, that must be one exceptional piece. Don't worry, we'll set it right. After 10 minutes, one more call. Another distributor. Sir, it has got problems, sir. Become black. And suddenly, things go wrong. Okay? So he tries businesses, fails. Comes close to success, fails. And from what I remember now, he is the man who told me that, what? He had to pay the school fees of his kids. He had to borrow money from his mother-in-law. Okay? Now, that's an interesting place to be. Okay? He survives it and he gets it right. Okay? And today, of course, he is everywhere. He is the man who's behind Naturals, 600 parlors. He says he's got a small target now. 3,000 is the number that he wants to get to. That's what makes people like him get it right. And he told me a great story. He said, I'm like that thin frog, skinny frog in that pail of milk. And I said, yeah, what is that now? And then he went on to tell me a story which some of you might know, but it's an interesting story. And it captures Kumraville's story, I think, very, very appropriately. It's a story of two frogs which are, running, looking around for food in a farm, and they accidentally fall into a pail of milk. Okay, and then what happens, of course, is that that fat frog says, we are finished. Okay, nobody is here, and that in fact says, no, let's try and do something. It's constantly going, trying to get out, and the fat frog says, you're wasting your energy. Okay, we are finished. The end is near. He says it almost like, I read the forecast in the newspaper this morning. The end is near, nothing's going to happen. And the thin frog, of course, still kicking, no, maybe something will happen. But very soon, of course, nothing happens. The fat frog dies. But this thin frog is still hoping, we're in trouble. We are in difficult times. Maybe there's a solution. He keeps kicking. And because he's kicking so vigorously and for so long, the milk becomes butter. And suddenly the frog finds that instead of being under the, being submerged in milk, he stands on the butter and jumps out. And Kumraville says, really, that's my story. I was down, but I never gave up. I was in trouble, but I kept trying. I kept kicking. I kept trying. I kept fighting. And look where that's brought him today. Yeah. Some of you will agree it's a good picture of Mr. Kumraville. Okay, and that brings me to another delightful woman. And this book has stories of a couple of women too. And this is a lady called Usha Sahu. Okay, Usha Sahu was a housewife, little girl from Orissa, didn't really do too much education. I think got married when she was 17, had serious challenges as a young girl growing up, lost her parents, lost a lot of her family to cancer, so struggled with her life. Okay, and then suddenly she decides to learn Mandarin, and she then goes to learn Chinese and now runs a business called Ye China. What does Ye China do? It teaches Mandarin in schools and to corporates. The problem that schools had was that you'd get this Chinese teacher or a lady who would come and teach Chinese, and everybody would be very excited. Parents were very keen to get their kids to learn Mandarin, all very good. But after a year or two, suddenly they found that the teacher was getting transferred because her husband got transferred, or she went on maternity leave, and suddenly there was no teacher. That's the problem that Usha Sahu decided to address. So what she does, she trains women, trains housewives to learn Mandarin, and then makes them teachers who go out and teach in those schools. Okay, and she's done phenomenally well now. And I think there's an interesting story she has to share. And she was telling me how she went to the international school in Mumbai. There's the American International School, and she says, as I sat over there, that the principal was an American. Sorry, and she said I was sitting like this. I could hardly understand what she was saying. Her accent, she was speaking so fast. And she says, my English is not so good. And she's from Orissa, and like a lot of people from Orissa, they have this thing about, they can't say sure, they say sir. So for example, she says her name is Usa. That's the way she calls herself. But here's the interesting bit. We all think that's the way they are. She knows it. Okay? She knows that she says Usa. And she says, you know what? That teacher took me, the principal took me out to meet the students in the school. And there were kids from like 50 odd nationalities. There were Koreans, there were Japanese, there was someone from Nigeria, there was an Australian, there was someone from Colombia. She says there were kids from various nationalities who all spoke English very, very differently. And none of them seemed to worry about anybody's accent. They all understood each other. And the kid who came first in class was not the kid whose English was very good. It was the smartest kid. And she says, that day I got a realization that, Usa, why are you worried? Let your friends think that you cannot say sure, you can only say sir. Now if somebody looks at me and says, hey Usa, you cannot speak English, I say, yeah, can you speak Chinese? And I think that's another great trait for entrepreneurs. They don't worry about their weaknesses. They don't worry about what I don't have. They don't worry about I'm not good at this. They focus on what am I really good at? What's my strength? And let me make the most of my strengths. I think that's a good lesson for all of us over here. And she can speak. She says, I don't care. If someone says, do you know English? I say, yeah, let's see. Can you speak Chinese? And then we'll talk. I thought I must end with another last story, which is really an example of a person who's not got it right. Young Chirag Arya runs a business called iChef. Okay, it's a business that's struggling. It probably shut down. It'll get bought over by somebody. He'll go on to do something else. But I think it's a good story, because here's a young man who, I'm telling you, 10 years from now, maybe 20, will be an entrepreneur that this country will say, wow, what a great guy. It doesn't matter that right now what he's doing is that he's failed. Okay, and I think we can all learn from failure. And Chirag's mother is a maths teacher. Okay, and Chirag says, you know what, my biggest lesson that I learned in iChef is a lesson that my mom taught me. My mother's been teaching maths, he says, for 30 years. But she tells me that every year I have to refresh and learn new things before I go back to school. Why? She says the maths does not change, the students change. Okay, and maybe there's a lesson in that for all of us in business, where we tend to think we've got the right product or the right service, or we know it works. We forget that the customer is changing. Okay? He says that what works for us in Mumbai doesn't work in Delhi, will certainly not work in Chennai. And we've got to remember that our success will come not because we've got one formula that we take out everywhere, but because we learn that, you know what, even if you have one formula, your customer is different, your customer is changing. The maths may be the same, the students have changed. So that's really what I thought I'll do. And the last bit I want to leave you with is really the spirit of You Too Can. And that's really a phrase which I figured as I went along this book, which is Vuja Day. Have you heard of that phrase? You heard of deja vu. What is deja vu? Been there, the feeling that you've been there before, right? So that's deja vu, which is really seeing new things, but finding them strangely familiar. Where you might go there for the first time, but you say, this reminds me of, or you see someone for the first time and say, doesn't she look like, right? What we all tend to do is we see new things, but we try and anchor them in our memory bank of familiarity. We want it to be something we've seen before. That's what we all do. Entrepreneurs are different. They are vuja de, which is the reverse of deja vu. What they do is they see the same things that we all see every day. They see familiar things, but they find them new. Okay? They see the same thing that we all see, and they see a car going and a man driving, and they say, wow, someone's driving that car. Never seen it before. And that's how sorry, a driverless car might actually get created. Okay? They have this ability to look at the same things that all of us did, okay? And yet they see them with completely new eyes and say, wow, never seen this before. I think that's really the common thread which seems to be binding a lot of these people. In many ways, I'd say it's the common thread that you'll find in this book, because even for me, I was looking at these people, and there could be lots of stuff that everybody's talked about and everyone knows. You know, Cafe Coffee Day is a big story, and everyone knows about it, but that's not it. What I was interested in was saying, wow, what is it about Siddharth that no one knows? What is it about him that no one's ever heard of? Or there could be a story of naturals, and we can talk about how natural has grown from being, you know, one parlor in Nungambaka, my road, to now 300 across the country. Great story. Why? Because, of course, great leader, you know, great charisma, and, you know, great product, great service. Not a great story. For me, the story really wasn't saying, hey, how did this frog actually survive in that pail of milk? Okay? And I think it's really, he survived because when everybody said, you can't do it, he took the T off and said, I can do it. And because he said, I can do it, I think we can all learn from that. That's really what this book is all about. Yeah.